Together so long we can't pretend. Remember the way we used to move, dance all night like young lovers do. Your heart is changing. Now we don't dance like we used to. Silent disco on the floor, baby. Mr. DJ, he'll get me through. When the beat's gone, you can't save me, baby.
This is Broad Radio. For you, by you. Broad Radio. Here for more.
Hello and welcome to Broad Radio. I'm Jo Stanley and my co-host today is the delightful Anjali Rao. Hello, darling.
Hello, sweetie pie.
Oh, love. You were one of our very first co-hosts on Broad Radio and I can't believe we're in episode 70-something.
Oh, my God.
73, I'm told,
Oh.
by lovely Beck, our producer over there.
Not bad. Congratulations.
Looking good for septuagenarians. But then you sort of toddled off and did a little reality TV show in the middle there.
Yes. Yes, I did. Still suffering the effects of that.
I'm going to ask you all about what it is to do a reality TV show a little later in the show, actually.
I will endeavour to have some answers for you.
Yes, I'm alluding to your stint on Real Housewives of Melbourne, but I'm very glad that you returned to us here and I'm happy to see you across the desk.
Oh, darling, thank you so much for inviting me. I always love doing Broad Radio and the fact that you don't mind when I turn up wearing my snuggly blanket.
I would be shocked if you were not wearing your snuggly blanket.
Really? So next time I can come wearing my Kmart dressing gown.
You should come in an hoodie. You should come in your
Snuggie.
Yes, why not? Well, today is the winter solstice, which means it's the shortest day of the year. So really, we've just tumbled out of bed and we'll be very soon back in our beds.
That sounds
If we were to
fantastic.
if we were to follow the sun, you know, get up when the sun's up and go to bed when the sun goes down. Wouldn't that be nice?
Oh, that would be absolutely tremendous. But why would we have to get out of bed at all? That's the way that I'm thinking.
That is actually my dream. I feel like everything I'm doing now is setting myself up for when I turn 70. Again, here we are, septuagenarians, and going, I'm going to bed now with a cup of tea and bring me my gin by mid-morning like the Queen Mother.
Fantastic.
And I'm just going to spend my life horizontal, I think.
That sounds absolutely brilliant. Oh, I'm there.
Are you
there
making
right
plans for have you got like a dream for when you retire or when you sort of are in your senior years?
Well, by then I would have won the lottery.
Oh, okay, good one.
So I'm definitely entering this Thursday. So by Friday, I'll be telling you all exactly where to go.
I love that. You remind me of when I was getting married all those 25 years ago and we were really broke and we were trying to work out how to pay for our wedding. And my husband, now husband, still husband, he said,
Oh, good.
I was like,
Current
okay,
husband.
this is what we're going to do, okay? I'm going to sell my car. I'm going to get a second job. And he's gone, right. And I'm going to try to get on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I'm like, okay, that really bodes well for your budgeting.
I know.
How
Lofty
we're going to be
goals.
25 years from now, he's still exactly the same.
But why would you want to bother going through the whole competition aspect when you could just enter the lottery?
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that so much easier?
As good a chance
So
of winning.
much easier.
Is that what you're saying? Look, today is a really interesting show. We're covering some really critical and important things, but I feel like there are three topics that are very much head of mind, or top of mind for me, and I think lots of people. Firstly, we're talking COVID. So many people have had it or are still, you know, facing it. And how do we get back into exercise and using our bodies again after we've had COVID? So we're going to be joined by Camilla Griffin, who is a rehab physiotherapist. That's later in the show. We're just going to be talking about, and this is something, I have a 13-year-old daughter. I know your son is...
He will be 13 in August.
Okay, so similar age. We're going to be talking about teaching our kids consent with sexuality educator Vanessa Hamilton, who has co-written a book for 8 to 10-year-olds that is really a fantastic tool for teachers and parents in having that conversation about consent.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's a big one.
So important. And you wonder what the difference is, for girls and boys as well, as far as that's concerned. I can't wait to ask her that.
Absolutely. And first up, in just a moment, author and journalist Antoinette Lattouf is going to be joining us. She's written a book, How to Lose Friends and Influence White People. Can't wait to speak with her because I'm learning so much from the book, which we have, it's amazing. We talked to her about how to make Australia less white. Okay.
I mean, Australia itself is really not that white. It's less than 50%. But you wouldn't know that for turning on the telly.
Isn't that interesting?
Oh, God.
Because
interesting is an adjective. There are other adjectives that I would use.
What adjectives would you use?
Shite. That's more a noun, isn't it?
Can be both. And a verb. But it's like, okay, so if we were to take the Logies, for instance, there's been a bit of talk about this week. Out of the 55 person-based nominations, and we're not talking about the shows that might have been nominated.
Yeah.
Individuals, 7 were of a non-European background. Only 7 out of 55. And we, of course, saw the incredible Tony Armstrong receive a gong, as they say.
Indeed.
He was the first person on stage to acknowledge the traditional owners, and he was the only BIPOC person on the stage to win on that night. And there's actually a story in The Age today where they say exactly that. I mean, it doesn't represent society.
Not even a little bit.
And you yourself have had an experience. I mean, you came to this country how long ago?
10 years.
And
10
with
years.
extraordinary experience of having your own show.
Thank you. Yeah.
On CNN. And
yes, I had my 2 shows on CNN, but I'd always been a TV journalist since I, left uni at 21, and had this great career, if I do say so myself. But so I'm half Australian. Mum's from country Victoria, but Dad was Indian, so I've got brown skin. I've got a British accent because of my upbringing, and apparently an unpronounceable name. It's 4 syllables.
Which part?
Anjali Rao.
Oh, okay.
I know. That's your practice at home.
I wasn't aware how incredibly articulate I am in being able to pull out Anjali Rao.
I know. Amazing. Gold star for you. But so all these things kind of stand against you when you're considered to be a different Australian, because difference is not embraced here. And I don't know why. It's just so depressing. But yeah, I mean, sort of going back to the Logies, it's like, okay, so you had Tony Armstrong and Mel B, flying the brown flag. But it was so sad because the the Gold Logies, when the nominees were announced, they always trot out the same picture in the media of the nominees, except the picture that they trot out is the one missing Melissa Leong.
Oh my gosh.
What is that about?
Are you joking?
What is that about? So every single face there is a Caucasian face. The only one that wasn't is not in that picture.
It's unfathomable. And is it deliberate? A part of you feels like, well, look, we need to ask these questions of our first guest because, and I just wanted to mention, not to fly our own flag, but one of the reasons we're building Broad Radio is because my goal is to make radio more diverse. Not just, I mean, I can't control all of media, but I can do my little bit, and what I know is radio, right?
Yeah.
And I just, I acknowledge when I had a radio career in commercial radio, everyone looked like me. If you were female, by the way, in radio, all of the voices you hear, only 27% are female, okay, in the country. But all of them looked like what I looked like then, which was young, female, white, and cisgender. Yeah. And, since leaving, I was like, okay, that has to change. We have to redress the imbalance and we have to change the media landscape. So that's what we're doing. And so I'm really thrilled. Let's get to our guest. I've learned a lot already from Antoinette. She's a multi-award winning journalist and author and co-founder of Media Diversity Australia, a resource that I have found incredibly useful. I encourage you to go to Media Diversity Australia. You'll discover the most amazing people who, have, I suppose, been kept by the gatekeepers away from mainstream media. So she's now written a book that is a guide to anti-racism, How to Lose Friends and Influence White People. Good morning, Antoinette. we've got no volume. We've got no sound. Let's try again.
Oh,
Hello.
that's
Oh, there you
great.
are.
There she is.
There we are. Who would have thought 2.5 years into a pandemic that I still didn't know to take the mute button off? But there you have it.
It's okay. You've done school drop off. You've got a lot going on in your morning. Congratulations on your book, Antoinette. I really love it. And we're going to, I've got a lot of questions about how the tips that you bring, the do's and don'ts in this book. But firstly, I wanted to say, I feel like, just going from the way people speak and what you read and your friends and your networks, most Australians would say that they're not racist. Okay. So as a nation, do you think we lack an understanding of actually what racism is?
Chuckling away there.
Yeah. Like, do you think Australians really know what racism is?
Well, I think, put simply, everybody has biases and everybody is racist and everybody can be racist. I think when people talk about and try and distance themselves from acts of racism, they think, I don't use the N-word, I don't shout at people and cuss their nationality because of stereotypes about certain types of people who drive. They think because they're not doing overt individual acts of racism, that racism doesn't exist. But there's individual acts of racism and then there's systemic racism. And systemic racism is what happens when our institutions of power are gatekeepers and keep out non-white people from having, access to a voice in politics, representation in media, or even access to employment opportunities and adequate healthcare, which then allows people of colour, Black people and people of colour, to thrive. So I think there's two very different things when we talk about racism. But I just think the first thing we should all do is go, okay, all acknowledge that we can be racist. Even though I'm a woman of colour, I have to constantly battle against anti-Blackness, which is very much ingrained in our society and has been since Australia's brutal colonisation. And so I think for a lot of Australians, we are really ashamed of our past or uncomfortable about our colonial past, but try and go, oh, well, that was then and that wasn't me. And, I am really nice to my Sri Lankan Uber driver, therefore I cannot face it. It's this really superficial allegiance to anti-racism.
I think too, it's a lack of understanding white privilege, or what you call the ledge, that we have. And I think I acknowledge my white privilege, and I see it in terms of things like that when I send an email to someone and request a meeting, I know that I have an expectation that I'll get that meeting because of my name. And,
I often change my name now on emails, and I'm super proud of my name. I love the name Anjali. I'm so happy that my parents gave me that name. But I often write Angie because then I know I'll get an answer.
So I think that people struggle to acknowledge that we have a white privilege. People think, oh no, well my parents were really working class, or I struggle with my mortgage, or and they associate it with an economic space, which
and there is. There is that component, but I just think privilege is not a dirty word. And the first thing I ask people in the book to do is to recognize their privilege. And we all have various levels of privilege. I'm an Arab woman, but I don't wear a headscarf. And so that has opened the gate for me to have a career in commercial television that I know would not have been afforded to somebody, or hasn't been afforded to somebody who is more Arab or Islamic looking. And so I think it's important that we all identify the different privileges we have. I'm more privileged than the very working class girl from the western suburbs, from a refugee background that I was as a kid. But that's okay. It's what you do with that privilege. Like, recognizing it is one thing. And too often studies have shown, to your point, that people go, but when confronted with privilege, it makes them uncomfortable. With white privilege, that they start to go, but I was raised by a single mum and I have a really big mortgage, and, and certain things to kind of up their stakes in the oppression Olympics, to be like, I have certain things that aren't working for me as well. But I just think as soon as we just all accept that we have to constantly work on being anti-racist, all of us, and that we all have some access to privilege, definitely some more than others, and then go, okay, let's just recognize that and then start to actually do the work.
Let's just talk about the book now, Antoinette. So in writing How to Lose Friends and Influence White People, I was interested to read that you really did lose friends while you were writing it. Why? What did they find so unpalatable about what you were saying?
Oh, it goes back to, and I hate to use these buzzwords, but white fragility. And I talk in one of my chapters, it's called 50 Shades of White. And it's like, let's just put it all on the table. Let's talk about what white privilege is. Let's talk about white fragility. And let's get you all to the point where you can be allies and advocates. There is an enormous amount of sensitivity around race and representation in the country. And that if you dare to talk about it, it can really get you into trouble. Whether we've seen, careers cut short, we've seen Yasmin Abdul-Majid driven out of the country, we've seen Adam Goodes booed off the stage. So we know that we are a country that is not comfortable talking about racism, and people would rather shut you down and end a friendship than actually sit with the fact that Australia has a deeply racist past, and is it a point where we can try and have a less racist and a more equitable future. And so in writing the book, a couple of friends of mine who are from commercial television friends were just a little bit uncomfortable with my take and my rebuttal about a high-profile white woman who said some racist things. And, they were like, oh, but I know her and she's not racist. And I was like, well, that whole she's not racist, I'm not racist, but I'm like, it's not true, because we can all be racist. B, plenty of people from the community that this particular presenter marginalized feel it's racist. I feel it's racist. And just because of that different take, and I said words to this effect, it is a little bit disappointing. I would expect my friends would be actively anti-racist.
I know,
Means that's all it means. After just saying that, I would hope you were actively anti-racist, not excusing someone as, oh, but they're a nice person. And simply for saying that line, that was the end of that friendship.
Oh,
that's where discourse is in this country.
That's the thing, because whenever I've told any of my white friends, and let's face it, they're mostly all white, about the things that I've experienced as a woman of colour in this country, in the media landscape, the response is utter disbelief, and that can't possibly be the case because we've boundless planes to share. So where's the disconnect? So why do people just go, no, surely you're imagining it?
I think the disconnect is because it then raises larger questions about things like meritocracy, about their position and access to power and privilege. People don't want to think that the reason they got there was because they had a leg up due to knowing somebody, due to looking a certain way, due to having a pronounceable surname, because then that makes them look at them. Everybody likes to think that they're awesome. And that it's a level playing field, and I'm here because I absolutely deserve it. And in some cases, yes, that is true. But there's countless studies that show, particularly in the media, what I have a lot of experience in, both as a journo and as a diversity advocate. The pathways are informal. It's who you know. Commercial television pumps out clones like there's no tomorrow. Like sometimes you look away and you look back at the screen and you think it's the same person. They're not only a white person.
That's so true.
It's a particular type of white person. It's a particular brand of white person who is slender, who is tall, who is blonde, who is interchangeable. And so I, in talking about this, was talking to a bunch of blonde white women who, in this whole diversity discussion, will no doubt be going, well, what does that mean for me?
Yeah.
What does that mean about why I'm here? And when people take systemic racism as a personal attack on their feelings, then there's a real problem, because it's larger than an individual person's feelings.
Well, yeah. So, Antoinette, what is your response when you see something like the Logies and the lack of diversity there, and how it is just not representative of our society?
Yeah, look, it's unsurprising. It's also unsurprising that it was Tony Armstrong who had to do the acknowledgement of country like that. I can't believe that continues to be acceptable. It shouldn't be, and I'm glad he mentioned that. But we're not going to, until our gatekeepers of power actively address the diversity and representation issues, like getting people through the door, let alone up to influential positions, let alone into roles that allow them to flourish. That's the inclusion part, and then be allocated and then be nominated for an award. That takes time. Right now, there's just a bit of a merry-go-round of talent that is the same sort of person, and you often see the same sort of person recycled through different networks and across different programming. And it's absolutely not the best person for the job, because we know when barriers are removed, then you truly allow merit to thrive and get more thinkers, more content creators, more innovation, different storylines.
It's
like you
just
see
interesting things to watch apart from anything else.
I mean, I've always said
just
that diversity in this country on TV means that you're a brunette.
Yeah. Well, we've got some fantastic comments already from like Eche on Facebook says you've just described Home and Away. So I mean, it's like,
and the truth is, like, television or legacy media is facing a business model crisis for a range of reasons, because of the internet, because of Facebook and Google, because of social media algorithms. In terms of comedy and drama, the Netflix and the streaming services are providing on-demand content. And so the old model that they thought was working in the 90s doesn't work for a range of reasons, least of all because the storylines aren't diverse and representative. Because you switch on Netflix or one of the streamers and you see content that is varied, and you see different storylines, and you see different characters with different socioeconomic disability, LGBTQI, brown stories, and hey, it's doing really well.
Yeah. Oh, I'm nodding my head vigorously at you. So back to the book. One of my favourite quotes from the book: "Being anti-racist is more than a label; it is an action." So powerful. And you give so many do's and don'ts in the book. It's very useful, and I really feel as though I'm going to return to the book often because this is a journey for me. It should be a journey for everybody to continually check in with myself and to really challenge myself to sit in that discomfort and go, okay, what is my privilege? What can I do better? How can I be an advocate? So can you give us some tips, please, on how to be a good advocate for a non-white person?
Yeah, and this is just not, this extends far beyond just for white people, because as a person of colour, I've learned a lot as to how to be a better ally to Black and Indigenous communities, because unless we centre our anti-racism work on Indigenous voices and experiences, then it's not really going to shift some of the biggest structural barriers, because it's Indigenous women who are the fastest growing prison population in the country. The mortality, the education rates for Indigenous men and women and children is still so completely unacceptable in a country like Australia. And so, yes, I'm glad that you pointed out that it's a journey, because it's an ongoing journey for me. But one of the two things I always tell people to do, because it's a little bit like climate change. You're like, oh my God, systemic racism and colonialism. Oh my God, what can I do? Just like people feel that kind of like climate change fatigue and overwhelm, like this problem is so much larger than one individual. And so then you just go, oh, I'm just going to give up on recycling because China is a really big emitter. You know, like that's what a lot of people, well, I'm just going to, you know what, I'm not going to do anything. And so I implore that rather than give up, what you do after you have identified what privilege and power and skills you have, and stop saying things like, I am not racist, but, and I don't see colour, because unless you are clinically colourblind, everybody sees colour. The first thing you do is identify a niche. Like, what is it that you want to do in particular? Because we don't all, like, one person isn't going to end Indigenous deaths in custody. One person isn't going to stop anti-Asian hate. And so what I have decided to do, for example, is challenge lack of representation in media, because media is a megaphone for culture, and it sets our opinions, and it sets, political agendas and things like that. So I've decided to focus on media representation as a pillar of our democracy. But you can start smaller. It can be about shifting representation in your workplace. It can be about community sport, giving access to more people from low socioeconomic refugee backgrounds. So to kind of open that pathway, whatever your interests are and your whatever bandwidth you have, my first piece of advice is just really find that niche and don't feel the need to do everything, because you can't, and it's overwhelming, and you're most likely to give up. The second thing to do is to be really clear about your audience. Like, don't get into biffos with your redneck Uncle Darren on Facebook, who's never going to change his mind. If you know somebody who voted for Pauline Hanson, you know what? I would mute them on social media and probably not bother having conversations with them, because they form part of the fives. So we classify people in change and influence kind of as 1 to 5s, and 1's your heart agree. They're your allies, they're converted, they tell you you're awesome, and they're really good because they're your cheer squad. And then you've got your 5s who voted for One Nation, who are Uncle Darren, who are people who say things like, oh, all this diversity and feminism stuff is punishing what poor white men. What about white men? We're left behind. I'd say park those people, because thankfully they form a small minority, are vocal and potentially destructive, but a small minority. But most Australians fit in the 2s, 3s and 4s. And they are a little bit interested, somewhat curious, a bit skeptical, time poor, and they're the people that you need to convert to become allies. And so I just think so often people spend energy banging their heads against the wall with people who are never going to support and people who are never going to be agents of change. So ignore those people. Don't only hang around allies who tell you you're awesome, because while it's important to have your cheer squad, that's not going to really shift hearts and minds. Focus on that cohort, but only that 2, 3s and 4s, but only when you've really identified what it is that you can do.
It's a very empowering book that you've written, and I thank you for it, because you've already acknowledged that you've lost friends in this way, and I expect too that as a journalist, I hope it doesn't make it harder for you to do what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was something. Anjali, I see you nodding because you.
Oh
you
yes,
know,
I've gotten every time. I'm sure you would agree with this, Antoinette, that when we do speak out about this, as I have, it took me years to do it because I was so afraid. But then I did, and that's when the haters really come out.
Yeah,
Blimey.
They do, and it's just like, just to prove how not racist Australians are, they're going to come and like troll you and be racist and sexist and like give you death threats, just to show you that we're
that's logical, isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you for proving my point. Yeah.
And to be honest, in publishing this book, I had to sit down and make a lot of decisions. I had to make, at the time I was working at Network 10, I resigned on good grounds and because I had other exciting projects. But I published the book knowing that I would probably lose my job, that there were some friends that would no longer want to be part of this journey, but that was okay. That me and my family could be targeted. I had to have a digital security expert kind of come on and help me protect myself and take geotags off photos. I took myself off the electoral roll. I did all of these things simply to have an informed, very well-researched conversation in a book about race. That's the sort of, but I had learnt from those before me, like Yasmin and Yumi Steins and Adam Goods, about what happened to them. And tried to protect myself a little bit. So yes, but I decided that I don't want to be on a payroll of a media organisation that's on the wrong side of history anyway. But that comes with privilege. That comes with the privilege of having a partner whose salary pays the bills. And I talk about that. I think that's really important because the people go, oh, how noble and great is Antoinette? Well, no, I'm not going to be turfed out. I'm not going to not be able to pay my bills because I have a partner whose salary affords me the flexibility to say, you to certain outlets if I just don't think they're doing the right thing.
And thank you for cleaning that up. Thank you. So Antoinette, I really loved the book and I really appreciate that you've put so much work into it and that it's come at some cost, and I really encourage people to read it and return to it. It is a fantastic book to help all of us in this journey, how to lose friends and influence white people. Check it out. Antoinette, I look forward to engaging with you again soon. I really love Media Diversity Australia. It's been amazing. So we will continue this conversation.
Wonderful. And I just want to add one thing. I have made new friends, right? So
that's good.
Yes, I have. Well,
she's not without friends. That's important.
Yes, I'm not without friends.
I'll be a friend.
And I have made some new and improved ones, just so people who are going, you know what, I'm not really sure if I want to lose all of my friends.
That's good to know. Thanks, Antoinette.
Thank you.
I'm in a new strategy.
Well, the important conversations keep coming with the release this time of a children's book intended to be a resource for teachers and, well, I would say all caregivers, really, to have conversations with kids about consent and healthy relationships. One of the authors is sexuality educator Vanessa Hamilton. Hi there, Vanessa.
Good morning. How are we going?
Oh, well, really well. I'm very inspired by, now I'm going to go out and continue on my journey as far as being an advocate for non-white people, and now I'm going to learn how
and
to
we
have.
thank you on behalf of all the non-white people.
But now I'm going to have some difficult conversations with my daughter about consent, and you're here to help us with
So
this.
much resonated with that conversation, with what happens to me as well, with homophobia and sexism. It's so, and they're the same people trolling, I'm sure.
Oh, wow. I mean, what kind of country are we, Vanessa?
We can only improve.
Tell us about Kit and Arlo Find a Way, which is your beautiful book.
It is a beautiful book. We're thrilled. Ingrid Laguna, who's a renowned children's author, and I have come together to write a book about consent, because it's more than just consent. I know that we can teach little children and throughout their life the decision-making skills they need to carry with them into their intimate and sexual encounters later on in life. So actually, consent education for children is just teaching them about human. Age-appropriate consent education has hardly anything to do with sex, whatever that means, especially for those younger children. It's teaching them about being human, because consent is relationships. It's essential to humanity. It's showing kindness, empathy, compassion, and respect. It's connection, communication, and safety. It's permission, reciprocity, generosity. I've got so many words, I could go on forever. And how to show respect to ourselves and others. It's wanting to be the best for yourself and for other people.
It's a very it's an interesting thing. Even in the first chapter that I read, it's a classroom situation, and you've got different kids in the classroom, and there's that interplay it was very familiar to me, because it was when my daughter was in primary school. She would come home and say, this child would behave this way, and they're taught to be good children. Yeah. And to sort of just play along and don't push back. And the setting of boundaries, I think, is something that we don't really teach our kids, because I didn't know how to tell my daughter, oh, well, if you don't want to play with that child that way, it's okay to say no.
Interesting. Oh, my mind's going so many places. I'll tell you a story in a minute about my sister-in-law read the book and what she did about her boundaries. But that's the idea. I'm glad you said that. Ingrid is a renowned children's author. She works in schools, and so do I. And so the story is a story of two friends navigating consent and friendships in about grade 5 and 6. And all of the examples that actually happen to kids in school currently. And the idea was that the 13 chapters, and they're called things like Kit's Glasses, Lego, Truth, Hot Chips, they actually relate to 13 topics of consent. And they relate to, as you said, body boundaries and safety, verbal and non-verbal cues, developing a sense of self and personal strength and self-determination, so that kids can be solid in the knowledge that their desires, wants and needs are as important as anybody else's. Understanding that yes or no should be shared. It shouldn't just be that one person is the gatekeeper of the yes or the no. So, for example, in one of the chapters, the two friends encourage Kit to watch a scary movie when they know that scary movies give her nightmares and she stays up and she can't sleep. They shouldn't have even suggested that scary movie for her to have to be the gatekeeper of the yes or no. And if you think of the sexual analogies, those intimate encounters, I started with what do we want these young people to know so that they're not ending up with these non-consensual encounters? What should they have been taught throughout? But yeah, an adult who'd read the story, and this was the idea. There's a whole lot of resources on the website that come with the book for adults, just to teach adults who've never had this education. And yeah, someone I know stood up and said, something that was missing in a conversation with one of their friends. They were able to stand up for themselves because Kit would, so they did too.
I love that.
And why was now the right time to put this book out there?
Well, the timing was from the universe, I'm sure. It was a year ago, and I was in a classroom with 5-year-olds, and I just taught them about hugging and permission and body boundaries and all the things. And this little 5-year-old dot of a thing, she's colouring in her body boundary sheet. And I walked past and she said, I'm so glad you taught me about that hugging thing. I just hug anyone whenever I want to. And her little friend said, yeah, she does, exasperated. And I thought, we can teach consent to little kids. I was successfully teaching it. Literally that day, Ingrid rang and said, would you like to write a book on consent? It's like, what? And yes, I would. And then the publisher saw me do a parent education session and contacted me the next day and said, wow, that was amazing. Would you like to write a book related to consent? And I said, well, I've actually got something on the go. So the timing, it's something I've always wanted to do, teaching sexuality, respectful relationships and consent education in classrooms from prep to year 12. I just knew there's a better way, and we just weren't addressing the key topics that all genders, all of our kids need. And more than 75% of teachers have never had any training in sexuality, consent and respectful relationships education, let alone parents being taught. So the idea is there's the book and they read it in the classroom. Parents can read it too. And in the back is extended learning questions. So, you know, to extend out the conversation. So you can leave it just at that or go over to the website. And for teachers, there's 13 lessons to use in the classroom. There's 13 two-page topics for all the adults to read to learn about consent. And we can do better.
So it's interesting though, because parents are coming from, and teachers are coming from whatever they were taught, right? Which our generation, I'm going to guess most of us were taught zip. Because our parents were very repressed. It's now, I think, we're freer in having conversations with our children, I think. Most of us, perhaps. But, you know, we're coming with very little understanding. So it must start with actually speaking with the adults to say, okay, what's your understanding and what has your experience been about understanding your sexuality?
Exactly. We've got a long way to go. We currently live in a really negative consent culture. Let's just think about till death do us part.
Oh, yes. That old chestnut.
That old chestnut. No, for example, and
that's when we all died at 17, right?
Well, it's the only way out of a marriage is to die.
Well, you know,
maybe your marriage.
So you
just
committed
got divorced.
that. So you exactly. So you have to go along with what that entails. You know, everything we do, we don't really have a lot of choice in, a lot of autonomy. For example, one of the body safety lessons that coincide with all of this is how good are we at expecting the kids to kiss and hug all the relatives at the Christmas party?
Oh my God, I get so irate about that because my daughter's to her father, my husband, you know, they're very tight, but she's like, no, not right now. I don't want to be touched right now. And there's an element of getting a bit sulky about it.
Okay, that's exactly in the adult notes on the website. So I want all the adults to go and read it for us to think about. We're teaching these kids from a young age decision-making skills that will get them through to their intimate encounters later on. So like tickling. They love tickling in certain circumstances, but are you sure that you've checked with the person that they like their feet being tickled? Maybe they don't. Maybe they like you to tickle a bit harder or under their arms, but as soon as they say no, we need to respect that. And
so you should treat them like a cat.
Well, your cat tells you when they've had enough, don't they? And we respect them.
But also, as I say, it's okay for her to want it sometimes, but also not others. Like, you know, let's respect her boundary in that moment as well, and which, as we all know, like that's a critical lesson.
Ingrid's crafted a beautiful chapter here in about pizza and dumplings and choosing takeaway. But Kit always likes pizza, but it started to give her a pain in the tummy, and now she doesn't want to have pizza anymore. And she has to speak up and say, I can't eat pizza anymore. I want to have something else. And Arlo says, but you liked it last time. Why don't you want it again? So again, think of those sexual analogies. Lego is my favourite chapter. That's a story I use in the classroom all the time. And Ingrid, again, crafted a beautiful way of putting it into the story. I can tell you the Lego story if you'd like and hear what the kids say in the classroom.
Yeah, very quickly, yes.
Very quickly. So just think of the sexual analogies as I'm talking about this, but you're playing Lego and you got the Death Star shipped from the op shop and all the pieces and you're building it together and you're so excited and you're nearly finished and then suddenly your friend says they don't want to play anymore. What are you going to do about that? And I've had kids in the classroom say, well, I'd punch them. Well, that's mean. They have to. They said they would.
Oh, they have to finish. You have to finish it. Yeah, right.
You said you would. You promised.
Yeah.
And then they sulk or whatever. So we talk about managing disappointment. It's okay to feel disappointed. How are you going to manage that? You should be proud that you gave the space for your friend to say that they didn't want to play anymore. And then the other kids come up and say, well, they don't have to if they don't want to. And we think about what else could they do. One person can finish it, the other person can do something else. They can change to a different activity. It's negotiating mutually enjoyable activities ongoing. That starts in the playground. That's got nothing to do with sex, but it sets those decision-making skills up for their journey for positive, joyful experiences.
But when we talk about sex with kids, I think, that's something that's really hard, because a lot of the time, any adult, parents, educators, whatever, they just inwardly cringe and go, oh God, do I have to talk about sex with this child? Which obviously makes the child feel the same. And then that's just a self-perpetuating thing that it would just carry on down the line. How do we stop that embarrassment that just, it's all pervading?
It's easy. We don't talk about sex.
Oh.
Sexuality education for kids. I know that's a broad one. I actually, in my parent sessions, I talk about how I think the word sex is really unhelpful. It's so limiting.
What should we call it then?
Human sexuality, which is so broad. It's about relationships. It's about growing up. It's about body changes. Sex has only a tiny little bit to do with learning about human sexuality, which is lifelong from birth to death. And yet we let it stop us having these conversations. People worry that kids are going to lose their innocence learning about human sexuality, as though it's taboo or negative or shameful, but it's not. It's learning about being human. They'll lose their innocence if something happens to them that they didn't know about or they didn't want to happen. So my key message to adults, to parents, who do you want to be the main person who delivers this content to your child about each topic of sex and sexuality? You want it to be you. So you need to get in first, because they're getting a sexuality message every day from the world around them.
That is a very, that's a sobering thing to hear, and I think something that all parents need to be aware of. The sexuality also, I think, is something that people don't assume children have, which actually isn't true, right?
That's not true. There's typically expected sexual development and behaviour from birth onwards. And as soon as we acknowledge that, then we can respond positively rather than negatively. But that's something we've never learned. And it starts from naming body parts when you're, nappy changes and in the bath in a shame-free way. Understanding who can touch their bodies when they're learning to go to the toilet, who can and who can't. Learning about reproduction, because it's an amazing story how humans reproduce. It's only for adult minds and bodies only, but it's an amazing story, and it's how humans reproduce, and kids are usually fine with it. Kids are fine with diversity, sexual diversity in the classroom. You talk about biological sex not matching gender, all those things that we're learning about, especially even puberty. Adults have just struggled to talk to their kids about their changing bodies, And some of the education lessons out there in the world talk about surviving puberty. It should be about celebrating it and us thinking of a positive journey through life for our kids. So I say to parents, do a bit of soul searching and research and practice to be the main educator for your kids. You can do this.
Yes, and I have to say that there are definitely adults that I've heard comment about conversations around consent and how we now talk about this. What's the term you actually used it? Enthusiastic consent. And I heard some more senior gentlemen on a media sort of outlet, having a laugh about how, what are you supposed to say? So,
3AW.
I don't know what it was, to be honest. I can't remember, but it was, it was this kind of, it sounds ridiculous. What are you going to talk, or what are you going to get someone to agree? Is this okay? Is this okay? And I'm like, have they ever had a really good sexual encounter? Because that is so deeply sexy when you start talking in that kind of way with someone. Don't you think?
I actually think they're outing themselves as terrible lovers, because those who know that two people
we had our
into it
suspicions
are
anyway,
awesome
even before
time.
that conversation.
But yes.
Yeah. I agree. And it's about, and you teach young kids, when two people are really enjoying that activity of playing in the sandpit, you can have the most fun. Yeah. And you know when you know. And we don't talk, for the older kids, we need to talk more about pleasure. We need to talk more about the fact that that amazing intimate encounter where two people are into it, and we do give them all the strategies of consent, yes and no's, of verbal and non-verbal cues. But it's just so sexuality negative. We need to be more positive, joyful, respectful connection. And unfortunately, they're learning from pornography. I won't say the TV shows, will I? TV shows, advertising, that bubble is just filling their minds when the bubble needs to come from the classroom and from home, and hopefully complementing each other.
And how do we teach them about pornography? Because, Joe's got a 13-year-old, I've got an almost 13-year-old, and these things, if they haven't already come up, so to speak, is that the wrong term to use? Then they're about to. How do we prepare them, I suppose?
Well, you do need to prepare them. Unfortunately, it exists. We can't pretend that it doesn't. Number one is talk about amazing, respectful, connected, fantastic, love, whatever relationships till the cows come home, so that they can almost see the comical nature of it when they do see it. You're constantly calling out song lyrics on the radio. Oh, that's so disrespectful. Why would he say that about his girlfriend? And that's talking about that. But you do need to say there's images on the internet of naked people and images of sex that are unrealistic. And they're actors. They're paid to do that. Well, not everyone's paid, unfortunately. You want them to be conscientious consumers of that industry too. Do you really want to, for the older ones, do you want to be a consumer of an industry where people are exploited and sex trafficked, and is everyone being paid, and is everyone safe? And so you talk about movies. When you watch a movie scene and everyone's speeding and buses crashing and flames, that's not really how you drive a car. Well, pornography is the same. It's made extreme so people buy it and look at it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
and never punish them for telling you that they've come across it. No. You will not have the iPad taken off you. I will not stop your game. You need to come and tell me.
I really love your use of analogy. I think it's very powerful, Vanessa. Yeah. And, we've had lots of comments. And so adults are really responsible, obviously, in this conversation, and in not really just, fucking up our kids by being really weird about, their choices and their boundaries that kids are instinctually aware of. We just have to give them the language. Tracy is saying, my mum always said I was a cold child because I didn't like physical contact. I'm still very selective as to who can come into my space. It's so,
that's individual.
This poor little, I can imagine little Tracy feeling that shame because she was, expressing a part of her. Anyway, Stacey also, who joins us on Facebook, says, what an incredible resource. I will be buying your book. And Vanessa, I also will be buying your book. It's fantastic. I really commend you. It's wonderful. So thanks again for your amazing work.
And thanks for the opportunity. Thanks.
With my respiratory issues, I know I have to quit smoking. And quitting before I'm 40 means I'll live up to 9 years longer. What will your future hold when you quit? Make your next quit attempt at Chemist Warehouse.
Broad Radio, talking inspo we love, info we need, and sharing more of us. Watch and listen live every Tuesday 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time at broadradio.com.au, or find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube and LinkedIn at Broad Radio Oz. Talk to us live. Call on 1300 8 Broad. Catch up on demand anytime, anywhere, every time, everywhere. On the train, we'll be here. 2 a.m. existential crisis, we've got you covered. Broad Radio. Here for more.
Well, most of us have had COVID or possibly the flu as well, some at the same time, I'm learning. The question is, how do we get back to feeling fit again and strong and perhaps exercising? I don't know.
What's that?
It's a bit hard. To help us move our bodies, we are joined by Camilla Griffin, physiotherapist specialising in rehab. Hi there, Camilla.
Good morning to you both. Thanks for having me on the show.
Alrighty, so what do we look out for if we're jumping back into exercise after any kind of illness? Because at the moment, my gosh, there's so much around.
There is. And a lot of us have been through COVID, and some of us now also have the flu, as you mentioned. I think for me, the first thing I just want to do is just recap the benefits of exercise to your audience. I think some of us have forgotten through the pandemic what we can get out of exercise. So it's really, exercise is all about improving your memory and your brain function. That's about all age groups. It's about protecting against chronic diseases, aiding in your weight management, lowering your blood pressure, improving your heart health, your quality of sleep, and also those feelings of anxiety and depression. So we know that exercise is good for us. But unfortunately, for a lot of us, since the pandemic or since we've had COVID, we haven't returned back to exercise at the level we were at, or even close to the level we were at. I guess the difficulties that I see across my clients is that people are really unsure about how to return back, knowing when to return back, the type of exercise to do. A lot of people have feelings of concern about what impact it may have to their health if they return back to exercise after COVID. And I do often have a lot of clients who are feeling quite disheartened about not being able to return back to exercise at their pre-COVID levels. So I think, yes, sorry, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say, you give us all the benefits of exercise, but I wonder why. Like, we all know exercise is good for us, but we still don't do it. Like, I just think, why is it? Even though I know all that, I make the choice to sit on a couch instead.
You do not look like you sit on a couch all day.
Not all day, but a lot of the times I go, I should be going for a run. I know I'll never regret it, but the actual getting out the door, God, that's hard.
That's the hardest bit. Yeah.
It is hard. And we all live really busy, demanding lives, and being able to fit it into our day can often be a struggle, but also that convincing yourself to do it. I think what I often tell my clients is have a moment of pause and ask yourself, well, why aren't you engaging in exercise? What is stopping you walk out the door? And I ask them to put pen to paper and have a think about what is the value that you're getting, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically from exercise, and have a think and reflect on, well, what's the exercise I'm telling my body to do? So as you mentioned, going for a run, well, something's stopping me from doing that. So have a moment of reflection and think about, what can I do to make that a more enjoyable experience? So is it changing the mode of exercise I do? Perhaps running's no longer, connecting with me. Perhaps I want to do yoga, Pilates. We're now in a post-COVID or post-pandemic period where a lot of us are behind screens. So perhaps going to the gym indoors doesn't really resonate as well as it did pre-pandemic. So is it about changing your exercise routine to be outdoors, connecting in with group exercises, because we are feeling a lot more isolated than we did pre-pandemic. I also really encourage people to link in their hobbies and leisure. So for me personally, my son is really into reptiles. So what my family have done is incorporated that into our exercise routine to enable us to exercise, but also get some enjoyment from hobbies and leisure activities at the same time.
They say that it takes 2 weeks to break a habit, and my gym habit was well and truly annihilated. I didn't get COVID. I'm very lucky that I didn't, but I don't think it's necessarily just down to COVID. It was to do with lockdown, because you were in lockdown whether you had COVID or not, but your brain has gotten used to not going to the gym. So when lockdown finished, I absolutely just forgot that I had a gym membership. Totally forgot. How do you get your brain to remember that it's just this non-negotiable part of your day?
I think it's about, as I mentioned, finding that benefit, seeing what it does, how does it add value to your day? So pre-pandemic, you mentioned you went to the gym. It's about you reflecting individually about, what did I get from that experience? I'm all about ensuring that we engage in activities that add value to our day. And yes, keeping up with it on a regular basis will enhance that routine and enable you to continue. But I really think it's about, what was the value I got and what is missing from my life currently? And usually it's that I think helps people form or reform that habit to go back to the gym. A lot of people since COVID, however, aren't really sure how to return back to exercise because they do experience a reduction in their physical exercise tolerance post-COVID. So for me, it's really about ensuring that you follow the guidelines. So the Australasian College of Sports Physicians and Exercise Physicians issued guidelines, and essentially they provide us with some really good guidelines on how to return back to exercise safely. And what the guidelines say is that even if you had low risk patients or patients with really mild or no symptoms at all, the advice is really to return back to exercise quite gradually. So only after 10 days of proper rest from the onset of your symptoms, or at least 7 days without symptoms.
So, because there's a lot of people I'm finding who are they're fatigued, but also they're finding their breathing is compromised, and so they're fearful of exercising.
They are. Look, Absolutely. And I think if you are returning back to exercise, the things that I would be looking out for that is really a signal to pause and stop and seek advice from your doctor would be things like if you experience abnormal levels of fatigue or exhaustion, breathlessness, racing heart, dizziness, a cough. Certainly all of those things it's about pausing and seeking advice from your doctor about how you would gradually return back to exercise. If you have other health issues after COVID or pre-COVID, you had those health issues, so comorbidities like heart disease, joint disease, blood pressure disorders, certainly my recommendation is to seek medical advice even before you resume exercise. If you are sort of falling outside of that group of patients, then it's really about returning to exercise quite gradually. So I think even just a light walk, 15 minutes a day, stationary bike. I really am an advocate for exercises in the pool, so hydrotherapy, walking in the water. But I also think as busy professionals, we're also doing activities at home that is essentially exercise. So sweeping, vacuuming, spring cleaning, that's all light activity that we can do to gradually build up our tolerance. And for me, it's about, as you are returning to exercise, really reflect in the moment you're doing the exercise, but also after it, how does my body feel? Do I think I can comfortably progress? And if so, perhaps add another 15 minutes onto your next workout. But take it slowly.
And also, and this is something I've learned partly through COVID and in lockdown, but partly now that I'm 50 in a month.
What?
I just view exercise differently now. I'm not doing it because I want to be a certain size or a certain shape. I'm doing it because it's a privilege to me to still be able to move my body. Like, I kind of think what a joy to actually go, how does this feel in the moment? That's the reason to do the exercise.
That's it. That's exactly right.
I'm still watching the scale. I'm like down to the milligram of what's happening on the scale.
I want to free you from that, doll. I want to free you from that.
Yeah, I tend to agree. For me, it is really about enjoying it. It is a privilege to exercise, and it's about I always think quite holistically about exercise, because we can just think about it, how's this improving my cardiovascular or strength? But for me, it's also about how does this make me feel? How does this make me feel? I want to feel powerful. I want to feel strong. I want to feel emotionally and mentally strong. So for me, it's about how does this exercise add the most value to my day? And also sometimes for me, it's about reflecting, how does this exercise routine add the most value to my family? Because I'm a big believer of incorporating exercise into my family life, because they go hand in hand for me. So I often reflect pre-pandemic, and I'd see, I worked in an office and we'd all rush down at 12:30 to quickly fit in our gym routine. And it was a mad dash. We'd run to the bathrooms, we'd quickly get dressed, we'd rush down, we'd do our little 20-minute workout, then we'd quickly have a shower and race back. And I think, well, yes, I can tick the cardiovascular and the resistance training boxes, but I felt stressed, I felt tired, I felt pressured to get back to work. So I think it's about, choose the exercise that makes you feel your best self. And you're right, to your point, it is a privilege, and it's shifting that mindset that I feel you get the most out of your workouts.
I remember those days when we'd all run down from the office at lunchtime, but that was to make sure that we got the chicken shinny baguette before they all ran out.
Before I let you go, Camilla, we've had numerous requests to see your snake.
Oh, yes.
Is the family snake there?
Yes. So by way of background, I think I mentioned to you that I'm a big believer of incorporating my exercise into my family life. Yes. My son, he's 4, he loves reptiles. So we thought we essentially incorporate visiting a reptile park as part of our weekend. And one of the things that we ended up getting as a result is a snake. And I can certainly get her for you. Just bear with me. She's right next to me. Hello, Natalie. Her name is Natalie. She actually can't. Yes. I was going for Slinky or something like that, but my son wanted a third child, and I had to sort of let it to him that Mummy and Daddy are stopping it too. So he wanted, his third child was going to be Natalie, wanted another sister. So we settled on the snake.
That's gorgeous.
Yeah, I'll get her. She's beautiful. She's 1 year old. For us, she's really added a lot of value to our life, because we're out and about at a reptile park, exercising and being outdoors. And, you know, as my son always says, life feels better outdoors. So for us, it's, you know, incorporating Natalie, our snake, and into our exercise routine. I'll get her for you. Just bear with me. She's literally right next to me. Hang on.
Can't wait to meet Natalie the snake.
I know human names for pets are the best. We've had a few comments there. I know someone who has a dog called Paul, which
I'm talking to her, but really she can't hear me. She can only hear vibrations. No. But I like to think there she is. You say hello.
Hi, Natalie.
Yeah, she's a good
Let's get her on a full screen there, Beck. Can you get on a full screen?
Oh, she's beautiful.
She's beautiful.
Oh.
There she is. Hello, Natalie. She's a good
girl. You need to get her a little friend, I think.
Oh, I know. Well, we went all out with her her home. I feel I'm one of those people, if I'm going to have someone in an enclosure, I'm going to make it absolutely beautiful. But yes, although there is a cat who looks out our window all the time at her, and I'm just trying to keep the two a bit separated.
One of those is not coming back.
Yeah, no, that's it. So they're in separate rooms. But no, she's added a lot of value, and I think, you know, for us, that's a way to keep exercising. We go out to the reptile park. My son loves it. My daughter does. My husband and I. So, yeah.
Oh, that is so great. Oh, Camilla, can I tell you, there's been a lot of talk on the socials about Natalie. I've got people are saying I would be exercising too if I had a snake. I'd be running away from it.
Well, whatever it is to keep you moving. I must admit, when I always thought our family pet would be a Labrador. This was a bit of a shock. But, you know, the pandemic does weird things to you, and, you know, we've changed things up a little bit, and it's probably for the better.
Well, Katrina is saying that that's freaking her out, but I must say I love Natalie, and
she is. She's not venomous.
No, I have a Labrador, and let me tell you, I've lost a lot of shoes to the Labrador, and I imagine Natalie is not chewing your shoes.
No, she's not. And look, for us, she's like very mindful for us. So if I'm, you know, having a busy, stressful moment in my day, or my husband is, or even my child, you know, for his own behaviors, it's really settling for him. She's just a really calming pet for him, and for me as well. Probably makes me a better person too, having a moment letting her crawl through me. So
it's amazing.
That's Natalie.
Well, thanks Camilla, and thanks Natalie.
Oh, you're so welcome. I just sort of say before I go to all your listeners, look, everyone's experience with COVID is very different. So my top tip is listen to your own body. Be really patient and forgiving. Don't compare yourself to others. You've got this when it comes to returning to exercise, but you just focus on you and stay in your own lane, and you'll just get back to your exercise when your body is ready.
I love it. Great
wise words.
Philosophy for life. Fantastic. Thanks so much, Camilla.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Wow, that was a first on Broad Radio to be joined by a snake. It's been delightful. Hey, I was going to ask you about being on reality TV, from one snake to another, perhaps.
Well, I was with 6 of them.
Real Housewives of Melbourne was quite an interesting experience for you, I know.
Interesting. Yes, there's that word again.
Yeah.
Yes, look, it's no secret that I loathed every single moment, and I would rather staple my tongue to a moving train than ever go back there again. But I am a world first. I did quit in my first season. No housewife has ever done that before. So I'm very proud of that. And I got all the headlines, so it made it worth it.
Have you felt that people... Like, if people said to you, did you imagine it would be any different?
I did, because I can look back now and say naively, believed what I was told by the producer who recruited me, because I said absolutely not. They came after me hard, really hard, and I said absolutely not. I will not be in a show like that. No, Anjali, it's not going to be like that anymore. Nobody wants that. You know, the world is a kinder place. That was my favourite one. And I believed her. And when I went into it, it didn't take me long to realise that I'd been egregiously lied to. I don't like being lied to. So I did what I had to do, which was to take my leave in a very dramatic fashion. But I did come away with 2 fantastic friends. So 2 of the other housewives, Kyla and Cherry, are my heart and my soul. We're super, super close. the others know where they can go.
Okay. Two other questions I think people often say is, how can you possibly forget that the cameras are there when you're on reality TV?
I can't speak for other people, but for me, my entire professional life has been in front of the cameras. From the age of 22, television journalist for decades. So for me, it's just normal. It's like, well, does anything ever happen if the cameras aren't there? Did it really happen? I don't think so. So for me, it's as easy for them to be there as it is for them not to be there. It doesn't factor in my mind at all. But I think for people who aren't used to TV, it's probably incredibly confronting, and a very difficult thing to get your head around. Not just the cameras, but the aftermath these days of the hate that comes towards you on reality TV. It's just horrendous. And again, being in the media, you are more used to it, albeit this is a different level. But I think it would be just so damaging for people who are not used to being in the public eye. Oh God, it's terrifying.
And I guess that leads to my last question, is around the, I suppose, the psychological care that perhaps you feel you should have. Do you receive it going into something like that? And is there an understanding of that there's some kind of need for responsibility for the people who subject themselves as
absolutely
members of this cast?
Oh, sure. So we had, the psychologist on speed dial for all of us. But if anything horrendous happened, which it frequently did, but a lot of it was not seen in the finished product. Strangely, it's usually the other way around. It's like they make it look more nasty. In our case, it was more nasty that they had to make it look like it was less so. But we all, I'm sure all of us, took full advantage of Karen, the psychologist, who was fantastic. But no matter what happened, how much people were lying on the floor quivering wreck, it was, oh, don't worry, you can, Karen the psychologist is on speed dial, just call Karen the psychologist. So it was much more we'll let it all happen, but you just get fixed up with the psychologist afterwards, where I think a product like that, they give you a plaster when what the whole thing needs is open heart surgery. So it's a sort of, we won't do prevention, we'll just do cure and hope for the best.
Yeah.
And I think all reality shows are like that. You do have, you've got to have your mental health experts on standby, because it messes with your mind to an absolutely insane level.
And there's a suggestion that should last for considerable time after the show finishes, and that's not always been the case. There's been terrible instances overseas where people have been cared for afterwards.
Absolutely. Some of them have just been horrendous when people have taken their own lives, and I can actually imagine how that would happen. You can get into a very dark space. I got into a really, really bleak space in my head, going, this is a terrible look for me. And if they'd been honest in the first place, then I wouldn't have had to completely annihilate the whole production schedule by quitting. But now I realise it was the best thing I could have done. I'm sorry for putting the crew out. I really am. But it was my only option at the time. And now I'm left with all these damn sequins. What the hell am I going to do with those? Oh my God. If anybody wants some sequins, give me a call.
You can never have too many sequins in your life. So you sworn off reality TV?
No, God, no. No, not at all. Not at all. Just that one. No, I do have another huge project that is happening very soon that I'm super excited about. I've also never been more scared in my life, but I can't wait until I can talk about it. And also I have written my own reality show, because you kind of have to these days. It's like nobody's paying for scripted anymore. So if you want to, be in TV, you've got to write your own reality show. But it's world first. It's not been done anywhere. It's a global concept, and it's getting a lot of attention. And I am absolutely thrilled. And it's not nasty.
Oh,
I know.
Just like Broad Radio, never nasty.
Exactly.
Actually, that was going to be one of our bylines. Broad Radio, never nasty.
I love it.
Yes. Oh, Oh, well, you know, coming from commercial radio, that sometimes is its bread and butter. So I'm like, not anymore.
Yep.
Darling, thanks so much for being on Broad Radio
Anytime.
today.
Such a
And
pleasure.
I know that you'll be back when you can fit us into your crazy schedule.
I certainly will. I count the moments.
Yeah, oh, thanks, love. And we'll be back. Oh, actually, no, we won't be back next week. We're going to take a little 1 week break whilst we have school holidays, and maybe some of us will get some sunshine or just a very well-deserved sleep. So we'll be back in 2 weeks. We'll see you then.
Broken mirrors, pretty lights. Another runaway city boy getting too high. But boys like you tell pretty lies at 5 a.m.